All right, here we are. This is Beckett's Talking, my podcast. Thank you for joining us here today. Beckett's Talking is basically the concept of this is that we're just trying to talk to people that are interesting, people that are doing something different, people that you might not get a chance to meet in your everyday life, and let's try to run the gamut. And I find this, for me, this is fun. For me, this is fun, talking to people like Paul Fileman here. Now, Paul is just one man. He's just one man, and you may have seen him around town. You may not recognize him here, but you may have seen him around town when he's out standing in front of, like in this case here, he's standing in front of the governor's mansion. When the governor was working about prison reform, trying to get people's attention about, hey, we get these kids young, you get them on the right path young, you're not going to have overcrowded prisons. Or maybe you saw him when he was in front of the prison. Go in there to say, hey, look, COVID-19 is hitting. Make sure these prisoners are safe. Because that really was a concern.
Yeah.
It was a concern when you got those close quarters. We didn't know a lot about COVID at the time. That really was a concern, and you just want to make sure that people knew that, what was going on in there. Or you may have seen him when he was in front of City Hall. That's when I first became aware of you in City Hall when you were talking about childhood poverty and the connection with crime. And then there you are in front of the governor's mansion. This was interesting because with the governor's mansion, this was when last winter, when the federal government was going to give the state how many millions of dollars?
$18 million.
$18 million to help kids who were going to be underfunded for food, and so they would get these families would get a little extra bonus in their SNAP package, so that the kids would not go hungry during the summer. And Governor Pillen says, I'm against welfare, I'm against this, blah, blah, blah. You got in front, along with a lot of other state senators, who got to the governor, and he changed his mind.
Yes. That was an exciting day.
How did that happen? Do you know? How did that happen?
Well, that was a classic example of getting information out to the community any way you could. And I heard about it on a Thursday afternoon. And I thought, if the community knew this was happening, they would help convince the governor to change his mind. And I knew that I had a tool that is pretty effective at getting messages out. Having done vigils like this before, found that I got good media coverage. And so I contacted Nebraska Appleseed. It's a pretty extensive organization that does advocacy for children. And contacted the director, and everybody was on vacation because it was the week before Christmas. Uh-huh. And I said, well, I can set up a vigil at the governor's mansion. And he goes, we'll back you on it if you do it. So they got a petition. That's where you see a QR code on my petition or on my vigil sign. If you took a picture of that QR code, it took you to a petition. And they ended up getting 6,000 signatures off of that petition from 23 counties. So I collaborated with them, and then I collaborated with senators and talked to Jen Day, Tony Vargas, and Danielle Conrad. The Nebraska State Teachers Education Association was on board. So we all just kind of started talking and amplifying everything that was going on.
Did you talk to the governor's office at all during that time? Or
Yeah, I encouraged people to call the governor's office.
I know you did, but I'm saying, did Governor Pillen reach out to you and say, hey, look, I see her out in front of my house here, governor's mansion. I see the point you're trying to make. Can we have a conversation, anything like that?
No. The staff there thought that he might reach out to me, but that's really what I found is when I do these vigils, that's really not my lane. There's other people like the senators and people that are in higher places than me can have an influence that. And it turned out, I think students actually ended up influencing the governor real heavily. But there's also a lot of people in out rural counties too.
Well, when your whole campaign is children are our future, and then you tell the kids, well, you're going to be hungry this summer, that doesn't work well.
Well, getting proximate or close to poverty, I think the governor was able to meet with some teenagers who really personalized what it's like to be in poverty and to deal with food insecurity. And I don't think he ever had those conversations before. And that's where I come from, because that's my background. And I know that when people like the governor, when they have those experiences and they can get proximate or close to poverty, incarceration. I volunteer in the prisons. I know you have too. Once you meet people that are affected by these issues, you have a different perspective, more empathy.
Now, you were a driver for UPS.
Yes.
And that's sort of how you got aware of some of these problems, right?
Well, I did mental health work for 25 years and raised my family, and seen poverty in the community when I was doing mental health work. When I drove for UPS, I saw the rest of the community that was not in poverty and wondered if they would care about the part of the community that was in poverty. And I thought to myself that they would, if there's a way for them to know about it. And for one person, how do you do that? That's the question.
Do they care? I mean, like right now, you're standing in front of the Underwood Towers there on Underwood Avenue. OHA, Omaha Housing Authority, has got some really substandard housing for these people. Bed bugs, mold, other unhealthy issues in these apartments. You're standing on that street. I see it there all the time. Living in Dundee, I see it all the time. You're standing there on that street. When people go by, do they show support? Do they flip you the bird? What happens when, you're standing out there? Do they think you're like just some guy with a "will work for food" sign?
It usually I've gotten to know the people that live in the tower. They come and talk to me all the time, and that's where I get a lot of information. I get a personal perspective on what's going on, and they support my efforts, and they give me information. In fact, we've been able to establish a tenant organization through those conversations, and there's many other people inside and in the community that have all come and offered me input. There's a woman that specializes in housing, very knowledgeable, and she walks her little baby by. I've met with her 3 or 4 times. She comes by and tells me information, gives me leads on information. So it's a community collaboration, and people, by being there, I don't push myself on anybody. I kind of call it my office. I go to my office. People that I'm working with, they're looking for me, and I'll say I'll be at the office at. I got permission from Captain Wells from the police department. That's always important when you do these vigils, is cover yourself. But Captain Wells is. I've met him through some collaborative meetings, and he said that corner would be fine. I could set up there as long as I wanted, and there wouldn't be any problems. So once I was there, and I contacted Joni Poor, the head of OHA, and I told her what I was doing as well. And that's how I did it at the Capitol. I had Lance at the Capitol Police. Tell him that I'm just trying to get a positive message out there. My message is always positive. It's always constructive. I never, if anybody wants to do anything negative, I tell them I'm not going to be a part of that.
You mentioned Joni Poor, who's in charge of OHA. I've been shocked, really, kind of, about the lack of response from OHA on this. Now, not just you. TV stations have done stories. Newspapers have done stories. It's been out there for months now. And I've not heard anything proactive from OHA. Am I missing something, or is it, is there stuff going on behind the scenes that maybe isn't getting the publicity it needs to make things better?
It's really hard to say. I think you're talking about a very large institution. That's when I dealt with the prison. There were things going on at the prison at the time that were defied, human dignity and solitary confinement and stuff. And you're dealing with a large, they're serving 6,000 people. Well, OHA serves probably 5,000 to 10,000 people. So you have a bureaucracy that has to protect itself. It has to maintain its functioning. And to have an impact on that, you have to get a lot of community awareness and create a lot of opportunities for people in the community to learn what's going on, and to opportunities to communicate to the governor and to the mayor and so forth.
It sounds to me like you're not trying to ruffle any feathers here. Sounds to me like you're being very generous with the response from OHA. In the meantime, there's people out there that are indeed living in squalor. Is that an issue? I mean, if you come on too strong, they won't listen. So you try to, kill them with kindness, if you will.
Well, I think it's strategic. It's building alliances, finding strengths in the community, people that care, that will communicate to A, want to learn more about it, and B, be willing to communicate to OHA. And they'll go up the food chain, too. They'll communicate to HUD. Then HUD, I've got a letter. A friend of mine wrote a very strong letter to the head of HUD in Washington, D.C. I didn't even know. I think I did know he wrote it. But he got a response back. And it was a very strongly worded response about all the things that HUD has been doing in terms of monitoring, all the media attention, all the things that we've seen going on. They have been getting all of that stuff because it's gone above OHA to their funding source. And this is not the first time this has happened in the country. Marco Rubio got involved in a situation down in Florida. And it played out just the same way. HUD got involved, started putting pressure on the local housing authority, and made things shift and start to change.
What about Don Bacon? What about Pete Ricketts? What about Deb Fisher? Have they gotten involved? Are they put any pressure on OHA and HUD?
The two people that have talked to Don Bacon, I went to his office with a tenant who lives there and was able to really give a very clear picture of some of the deplorable conditions that people are experiencing. Because some of it was videotaped from a health department inspection, so it wasn't like you couldn't miss what was there. The health department inspectors went to 9 apartments that were all recorded, and you could see deplorable conditions, people using their stoves for heat, major problems in the housing conditions, habitability. We showed that to Don Bacon's office, and I talked to Don Bacon at the parade after that, and he said that his staff did a good job of reaching out and talking to HUD. And Dan Osborne, who's running for Deb Fisher's position, came over and met with tenants for about an hour, and so did Preston Love. Also came and toured some apartments, went in and saw some of the issues going on inside of the apartments.
You talk about Don Bacon. I will say this about, take politics out of it. The man and his staff are very good with constituent services. I don't want to get into, we're got a campaign going on, and that's not to, promote anybody or to endorse anybody. But I will say that I know that over the years, Don Bacon and his staff have been very responsive to the people, no matter what the issue is. If they can help, they go out of their way to do it.
They've got the power, the staff to do it, and when I've reached out to them, I know that they have made it. I had to give them real clear information. They said they didn't have the information that we gave them. Once they had it, and that's the thing that I try and do is find the information that people can't argue with.
Well, that's it. Okay, so you say find the information. Do they try to hide this information? In other words, if you're trying to get to OHA and HUD and HUD, if you're trying to get to them, can you get this information readily, or is it all buried and doing FOIA requests and making
In large institutions, yeah, there's prisons. The media has no access to prisons or OHA. They've always been restricted. So you have to work with tenants, people that have had interactions, like I've talked to people involved with the union that has staff working in OHA, people that have lived in OHA facilities, people that just have knowledge in the community about the impact of services there. And that's what I do at my vigil. It's a whole day of just basically having I always say I'm there and the coffee's always on. I mean, you come by and we'll talk, and I'll make notes, and then I'll send emails to people based on information I have. And there's still investigations going on right now through news outlets following some of the leads on the stories that we've connected them to.
Media outlets in general are spread pretty thin these days. Whether it's newspaper, radio, TV, they're spread pretty thin. Do you find, though, that you're getting good response from local media to tell these stories?
Yes, every news station has covered this story. And it's been pretty difficult because there is a wall, and when the only access is through multiple other outside sources requesting records and so forth. It's difficult, but they've continued to respond to the public's outcry about issues and tenants. When tenants have said these are conditions that we're dealing with.
Okay, let's move on from that topic and get into more of why you do what you do. You and I talked a little bit before the podcast, and I said, it's always amazing. People say, well, I'm just one person. Or my vote doesn't count. I'm just one vote. But you're proving them wrong. You're saying, hey, no, one person that sees a problem, that sees a need, can indeed make a difference.
Yeah, and it's really a matter of knowing that there's a lot of other people just like yourself, and everybody has kind of their own lane. Like you have a lane. I met you you probably don't remember. I struck up a conversation with you in the Buc-ee's on Dodge Street because I knew that you went to visit guys in prison.
Yeah.
And I introduced myself because I've been going to the prisons for 7 years, volunteering there. So, and getting to know those relationships. And then you introduced me to people that then introduced me to other people. And then I introduced those people to other people. It's this giant networking to raise awareness about what's healthy in the community. And there's a number of organizations that do really good work, and I've collaborated with them as much as I can.
You know, and you said, you know, you weren't wondering if people really cared about some of these social issues. I find it interesting because we all know what the rhetoric is. We all know what the politicians say on either side, right? What the bullet points are, what the slogans are. But you mentioned the prisons. Having been in the prisons, having worked with these prisoners, I know two things. I know that there are some people in there that did some really bad things. They're very bad people, and they need to be locked up for a long time. Excuse me. But I also know there's some good people that did a bad thing. I also know there's some people out there that maybe did some bad stuff, but they've had a change of heart while they're in prison.
Right.
That story doesn't get out.
Yeah, the leadership, the strongest leaders are some of the people that are sentenced to life in prison and have.
Well, that's actually one of the charities that I work for, and I think you work for them also, the Circle of Concerned Lifers,
Yeah.
which is a group of prisoners that aren't getting out, but they work and they mentor younger prisoners who are.
Yeah.
And they deal with anger management, they deal with finances, they deal with other issues like that.
There's a few of those guys that actually agreed to move from NSP, the Nebraska State Pen in Lincoln, to the youth center, which is the 18, 19, 20-year-olds in Omaha, and to live there to be mentors for the guys that are young. And that happened about 2 years ago. And those guys are still there doing that mentorship.
Yeah, and of course, that doesn't get the publicity. That doesn't get mentioned by the politicians. That doesn't get votes.
No.
You know, there's stuff that's being done to try to make things better.
Yeah, and there's more organizations. Rise is doing an extensive effort to raise awareness in the community, and I've participated in a lot of their activities. And I think the new director has actually got some sympathies in the right direction for making changes and helping people get out and stay out.
Uh-huh. Do you think the state needs a new prison?
Yeah, I don't even want to go into that too much. I know that the directors and the governor's worried that if they don't make some major changes in what they're doing in criminal justice efforts, that as soon as this prison is built, they're going to have to start building a new one
Right.
after that. So you'll have two $400 million prisons. And I think that reentry and support, and also if you follow where mass incarceration, which is a large incarceration numbers, goes back to poverty and racism in the community and in Nebraska, and has fueled a lot of overcrowded conditions that result in people not having access to any resources. And then they get out, they haven't gotten any skills, they've got mental health problems, and they're going to go right back to their old behaviors.
Well, you know, talk about so many of these problems that you're dealing with, mental health being one of them.
Right.
I mean, how we don't do more for mental health in this city, in this state, in this country is beyond me. Because if we had better mental health facilities, a lot of these other problems wouldn't maybe just go away, but they would definitely be eased. You know, the problems would not be as bad, and a lot of these problems would take care of themselves.
Right. And I think the biggest thing I've realized is children's exposure to poverty is pretty extensive in this community. There's a high number of children dealing with a high level of poverty from the day they're born. And when we expect people to grow up in those conditions that we would never have our own children grow up in, given the choice, then you're going to end up with major mental health problems, educational deficiencies, things that lead to incarceration.
Well, plus you've got a kid growing up in a violent neighborhood. There's post-traumatic stress disorder that is never going to go away,
Right.
or at least not going to be handled for years to come.
Yeah.
People don't realize that. People don't think about that. And it is. It's like, well, I'm not one of those people. Those people got their own problems, and it's too bad, but I got my own life. I got my own family. I got my own things to worry about.
Yeah, and I think when I did the vigil at the city hall, it was focusing on child poverty.
Uh-huh.
and I think that people weren't really aware of how young kids are and the impact of poverty when they're born. I mean, just looking at the impact on health, the number of infants that die during childbirth and mothers that die during childbirth is significantly impaired by poverty or impacted by poverty. And then the life situation that kids grow up in, not having fathers. And I think there's an article in the paper today or recently about the impact of incarceration on families, the lack of father or mother.
Mm-hmm. I did some years ago. Did some volunteer reading for some elementary schools in North Omaha, and it will never leave my memory of a teacher telling me one day, "Thank you for coming out here. You may be the only positive male role model these kids see all week." And the average person doesn't know that. The average person doesn't realize that. The average person got other things on their mind.
Yeah.
You know, they got other things to worry about then. So what makes you so different that, you know, I mean, you got a family, right? What makes you so different that you care about this stuff? What other people might see it on the news and say, "Oh, that's too bad," or "That's too bad, here, let me write a check," and that's the end of it. You take action. What makes you different? What was it in your background? Were you raised in a family that gave back to the community? Were you struck by some event early in your life that really stuck with you that made you do something like this? What makes you different than the people there that are living somewhere else that say, "Well, that's too bad," but?
Well, I think it's a lot of its opportunity too. I mean, I feel blessed that I've had our family has never been perfect. We've had all kinds of ups and downs. And, my mom had mental health issues way back in the day when they didn't know what to do with mental health issues. And, I've had depression, but I found good solutions to it. I feel blessed. I mean, I found a medication that helps me. I don't smoke anymore. My family's doing well. I feel that I'm in a perfect situation to pay it forward. And I can bring other people in to the process that can make a difference in a lot of people's lives. And once you start to see the impact you can have in people's lives by collaborating with other people and connecting with people impacted by poverty and so forth, it's very rewarding and impactful. And you connect with a lot of other people doing the same things. And it creates this symbiotic relationship amongst like-minded people that want to make the community a healthy community. Because poverty is really, if you think of it, it's like cancer. And I think you and I talked about that. It's a cancer that grows, and you don't always see it when people have cancer. You don't always know that they have it, but it can kill you, and it really impacts the community. My wife survived pancreatic cancer, which is a huge blessing. Yeah. I mean, it's like a 9% survival rate, and she survived that and I had insurance to pay for it, and I'm thinking, I'm retired. We were able to get my dad passed last year. He left us some money to have, not a ton of money, but enough to live comfortably to where I could get up every day and come in to my office at 50th and Underwood and do this work. And it's very rewarding. And it's, and the people that I talk to really enjoy participating in it and learning and doing their part. People always ask me, "What can I do?" And I always give them ideas. I talked to a guy yesterday who said he'd like to use his IT material to build a system where everybody in the community can rate their landlord on like a Verbo rating. Yeah. Why not do that for landlords? And he said he'd like to figure out how he could use his skills. And I always try and help people think of ways that they can come to the table. And then they'll come back and talk to me another week or two later. That little lady comes by with her baby, and she's telling me she's got tons of relationships with people in the housing field, but she walks her baby through the neighborhood. So being out there and it's kind of, I always think of it as like trying to start a fire to create change. And you can flick your little lighter, and if the wood's wet, it ain't going to burn. But this vigil seems to be a great way to create some fires that create positive change. It's exposure, it's networking, It's just a great tool, and I've learned about advocacy over the years studying people who have done it. I mean, the civil rights movement was full of masterminds of people doing it. There's a guy living in the Underwood Tower now who came here to help his dad and found him living in bed bugs, who's been doing all kinds of legal advocacy. He helps tenants write letters. I talk to him every day. I just talked to him before I came over here and told him I had to put my good clothes on again and go talk to a guy that I've met. And he's at the library doing his research on stuff and taking OHA to task on providing habitable living conditions.
The how long have you been in front of the Underwood Tower? Have you been there, how many months?
There was snow on the ground when we.
I've seen you out there in the rain. I've seen you out there in the snow. I mean, yeah, you're not just a fair weather vigil person. You're there.
Well, and did I tell you the story about the rain? The guy was in a wheelchair there who lives at the tower. He's disabled, and it was pouring down rain. It was probably that day you stopped by there.
Yeah.
And after that, he was over across the corner, and he waves to me. And I'd seen him, but I didn't know him. I went over to him, and he goes, "Oh, real frail guy." And he goes, "My wheelchair stopped, and it's pouring down rain, and there's nobody around because it's 10 in the morning, traffic." So I said, "Well, let me push you over." So I pushed him across the street, down the sidewalk, under the awning, and he got his wheelchair hooked up. And so he was good. Well, then a couple of days later, he came out. He was going to the store again, and he stopped and said hi, kind of introduced himself. And he goes, "How long are you going to be out here with the sign?" And I said, "Well, I'll probably be out here until conditions really start to improve in the building." And he goes, and he just is so sincere, but he goes, "Do you think you could get me some heat in his apartment?" And he goes, "I have to put a space heater in my bathroom to heat it up so I can take a shower in the morning." And so those are the kinds of experiences that I have. And then I was able to advocate for him to help get a work order put together so that they would look at the heat issue, which is a major issue in the infrastructure in that building. But, it's those personal connections, people with lived experience, people that are willing to bring their access. They see me, they start to trust me. I post things on Facebook. I send messages to people. I send emails. They know who I am. I met Don Rowe at a movie that I referred him to about racism history in Omaha, and I introduced myself, and he goes, "Oh, Paul Feilman, you just sent me an email about this movie. That's why I'm here today." So people know me, and I as far as politicians are concerned, that's a whole nother area that I find really hard to impact directly. But I have people that I'll reach out to that I'll ask them to contact.
You say people know you, but I can also see it be like if I'm a politician, if I'm mayor, governor, city councilman, county commissioner, whatever, and I see you coming up with a sign and going, "Oh, damn, it's him again."
Yeah. Usually it's a positive sign, and I usually do some background work with people to talk to them. I went to Keith Station, talked to him about poverty vigil at the talked to him about the poverty vigil at the mayor's office before I started it. And he asked me, he says, what can the mayor do to make things better? And we talked about that. I said, well, first thing, talk to the police department, because they know, and the police department have actually testified about anti-poverty initiatives, because they see jobs and anti-poverty things as a way to really make the healthy community.
Let me ask you this. We were talking about mental health earlier. Are there people that live in that kind of squalor that just feel comfortable living in that kind of squalor? Because I couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. But are there people out there that maybe life is just beating them down so much, or maybe they were raised in that sort of environment, that if they're living in an apartment with bed bugs, no heat, and mold, it's just like, just like visiting grandma? Are there people like that that sort of thing doesn't bother them?
I think you can become desensitized to it, especially when you don't. I think there's an experiment in my undergrad days about some psychologists that tested or were doing some probably not very ethical tests, but they would shock a dog in a cage randomly. He would touch the bottom of the cage and it would shock him, but there was no systematic shocking to it. And he became so psychologically traumatized by the randomness of this shock that when they opened the cage, it didn't leave the cage. And it's kind of a learned helplessness because of an inability. That's what I'm trying to support people in prisons and in the Underwood Towers, is give them a sense of hope and see that people care, and then they can then empower them to start taking steps to make their situation better and to walk out of the cage, so to speak, when they're given the opportunity.
I mentioned, one man doing something, and you're that guy out there. Do you get people out there that want to join you and spend their afternoons standing out front with you? I mean, people that maybe not those that live in Underwood Towers, but like just everyday citizens that maybe say, you know what, I want to help out too.
Well, usually I always talk to them and just say, coming by and talking to me and strategizing and going away and doing something. That's usually what people enjoy doing. They like talking to me and learning about what's going on and being a part of the process. And I try and brainstorm with them and get information from them, especially if they're tenants. Tenants, I don't bother tenants, but they know I'm there, and they'll talk to me when they want to talk to me, and they'll ask me. There's a guy talked to me today, and I feel so bad. He's got some problems with his bank account. There's something going on, and he thinks his bank card got sent to another address, a new bank card, and his phone won't take texts, and we were trying to figure it out, and he sat there with me for quite a while, and we were trying to figure it out. And I talked to Joni Poor, the director of OHA, about getting a social worker at each tower to do those kinds of things. And she said that was a good idea. She just she didn't think the community would ever fund it because it would be pricey. You'd have to have a full-time person working at 20 towers, which would be, a full, that's money, to employ people and create jobs like that. But I still think that that's not something we're looking away from. I think that's still a very powerful tool that Joni Poor has already said would be a good idea. And it wouldn't be a guy with a sign. It would be professional social workers or case managers. You could even link it up to the case or the social work students at UNO, or healthcare workers or nursing students, and they could all work together in each tower, and you'd have resources.
So to maybe backtrack from a previous question, so you and Joni are working together on something. So it's not so much that it's adversarial. It's like, okay, you have a good point. Let me see what I can do here.
Yeah,
or is she just humoring you and saying, oh, it's a good idea, but I don't know if we're going to be able to get the funding. How do you feel that's working?
I think that we'll just keep working on things. Right now, we're working on a system that would, like tomorrow we have a meeting where we've invited service providers. There's companies that go in and provide help to people living in their apartments. And they can actually help them get things out of there. If they've got clutter, if they've got bugs, they can actually help them clean their apartments out. And they can do housekeeping. They can do cleaning for people that are disabled. And those organizations, I've made contact through a tenant with one, and she's bringing 4 of those organizations to the tenant meeting tomorrow afternoon. And they're going to talk about how to apply for the services, what we can provide for services. These are free services if you're disabled, and that's going to help OHA. And when I do things like that, and I sent that information to the head of the tenant association who actually works for OHA, and he thought it was a good idea because he's had to do that same thing in his own apartment. So when there's ideas like that, and I try not to get into this adversarial conflict stuff, it just isn't very productive. There's other people that have to do that and need to do that, whether it be legal or whatever. But I think I'm always looking for finding ways to bring community awareness to support positive community health.
So what is next? So, I mean, are you gonna be there as long as it takes until those apartments are cleaned up? I mean, how long are you gonna be there?
Well, I think it's almost like I look at it as almost like an office where I can do advocacy for creating awareness and helping people. And I always ask my question, I could go volunteer at a food pantry one day a week and call it good.
Yeah.
But I think I've got skills, and I like doing what I'm doing, and it can impact a lot more people. Because the vigil for the governor's mansion impacted how many people? That was $18 million, 150,000 kids now have benefits in the summertime that they wouldn't have, and that'll be ongoing. How many people are impacted if I can make changes in the OHA system? We're talking upwards of almost 10,000 people living in OHA facilities. And the percentage of people living. When I asked at the tenant meeting last week, there's 20 people there. I asked them what the conditions were on a scale of 1 to 10. And the average is about a 2 or a 3. So if what we do to benefit tenants in that tower, we can do that with people that are already working with other towers and OHA in general. If we find something that OHA can buy into, that they're okay with, and it's effective, they'll do it. That's typically how it works. And if I try not to aggravate people too much, like when I did the vigil at the mayor's office, I never went out of my way to aggravate her. I did everything in a peaceful, productive way. I did that at the governor's mansion too.
Yeah, well, you know what they say: when you catch more flies with honey
Yeah.
than vinegar. Yeah,
And bringing a lot more people to the table and getting them close to poverty. With news coverage like this podcast gives me a chance to get more people to understand that understanding poverty is you have to get close to it. Brian Stevenson's a famous guy. He's done a lot of advocacy and nationally, and Father Boyle out in Homeboy Industries. They all have gotten proximate to poverty, to be impacted by the poverty, and people impacted by poverty. You have these relationships that it changes you.
uh-huh.
You know, when the guy tells me he needs heat in his apartment, that changes you. You
Yeah.
know, you have those experiences, and you try and find ways to help other people. To deal with those things.
Did he ever get the heat?
I think he did, and unfortunately, it was they came up the next day and were. In fact, it was a media person. My email wasn't going through to Joni, but I CC'd somebody from WOWT. I think it was a Sample. Her name is Sample. She picked up on it and sent a message to Joni asking about that gentleman, and my email was getting kicked back because I think I had something wrong in it.
Uh-huh.
But her email went through, and then I got a response back from Joni Poor that went to her that said she hadn't heard of that individual, but they would be working on it. And the next day he said that maintenance came up and was talking to him about trying to figure out. They have a weird heat system there. It's old radiator heat system, so the pipes through the building can leak. And
Yeah, when was that tower built?
I think in the 60s, 70s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's got an old boiler, and so you have lots of heat problems. Many tenants. I wasn't there during the winter months, but that's when the videos of the apartment inspections was done, and you could see the red coils in the video with people using their ovens to heat their apartments.
Paul Feilman, one man who says, hey, there's some things here I can do something about. There's some things here I can make things better. What would you say so far is your biggest accomplishment?
Oh, geez. I hate to pin it down to one particular thing. I like the fact that my family likes what I'm doing. They understand what I'm doing. That's been kind of because it's like you seeing what I'm doing. My family has gone along for the ride, and they're never quite sure what I'm doing. But my daughter does stuff for me, and my wife does stuff. The kids all support me when I put things out there, and that's been pretty rewarding. Having my family understand what I'm trying to work on and do it. And
You mentioned your wife survived pancreatic cancer.
Yeah.
How's she doing?
She's doing really good, but it's living on borrowed time, and she understands that, and the family understands it, and we appreciate every. Now she does the home, take care of the 12 grandkids gig while I'm doing this, but the grandkids have seen me on TV now.
So Grandpa's cool.
They asked what the sign was, and I sent it to their mom, and she watched the video, and they lit up when they saw the sign, and they understood. And people talk to me, and they say, there was a little kid who told somebody out in the small town I live in, Utan, that they saw Colby's grandpa on TV. And so I'll talk to people. That media coverage is really good. Having you as a resource, you've connected me to people at WWT, and you know people who know people, and that makes a big difference.
And, that is one of the cruel things about my life and my career is that I know that I've been able to make a difference in some people's lives. I've been able to help some people.
Yeah.
I'm not patting myself on the back, but I know that I've been able to connect you with somebody.
Well, you've been one of the, when you saw me out there, because you know what I do, and you understand how I do it, and not too many people you run into go to the prisons on a regular basis. So that's a little brotherhood we had, connection that we had on that, but your support, because for a while there I didn't talk to a lot of people. It was kind of cold
Yeah.
for the first month, but you came by several times.
Here's the
Oh,
thing.
and I got to tell you a little.
Okay.
The one guy that got this whole thing started, who lives at the tower, is 76. His son came and found the living conditions and started doing all the advocacy. I met him a couple times, but one day his son was going inside with a bunch of bags, and he goes, "Well, I can't talk too long. My dad, 76, it's his birthday." Well, it was my birthday too. It was just a weird coincidence, but it was just a weird coincidence that I got a kick out of, and they found it, and he found it pretty funny too.
Well, I'll tell you what, you impress me, and like you say, once you get some media coverage, other reporters will copy, and the story takes hold, and it gets bigger and bigger, and so hopefully, make some real inroads with those people at Underwood Towers and all of OHA housing. And you got a pet project after this one?
No, this one, I think it's actually kind of simplified my things because this is such a big project that I'll probably be working on it, for a long time unless something changes. I've had to cut my hours, like I said, to go walking in the morning because I wasn't getting enough exercise. You got to take care of your health. You know that.
That you got to do.
You can't do much anything for people if you don't take care of your health. So I got to do that. My wife's working on her health, and so I get up in the morning, go walking, and then I go to my office at Underwood Tower.
All right. Well, I'll let you get back to work then.
All right,
Paul.
Thanks.
A
Tom.
pleasure as always, and good luck to you. And we'll see you. We'll see you in the neighborhood.
There you go.
All right. Thanks for joining us for this podcast. Every podcast a little bit something different. Interesting people with stories to tell, and I just find this fascinating. About somebody says, "Okay, what's out there? How can I help? Let me do something." And just think about how much better the world would be if we all were a little bit more like that. If everybody just did a little something. Have a great day. We will talk to you later. Take care and bye, y'all.